It's 5 o'clock in London, it's midday in New York, midnight in Hong Kong, 4 a.m. in Sydney, 9 a.m. in San Francisco, and 10:30 at night in Mumbai. Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world today. My name is Patrick L. Young. This is the IPO-VID live stream, Series 33, Episode 3. In other words, in the aggregate, IPO-VID episode 195 starts here. And today, ladies and gentlemen, we have part one of our review of 2025. And what an epic year 2025 has been in oh so many ways. Looking back to big stories of this year, well, it's morning at the SEC. Woohoo! Paul Atkins, the chairman, gave the sort of support to calibrated public markets disclosure and regulation that can only encourage more US listings and a bigger chasm between the USA and the rest of the world. He gave that speech at the start of December in where else? The hallowed halls of the New York Stock Exchange itself after ringing the opening bell. What a fabulous day for markets and great news as we head into 2026 that we're going to see at last more regulatory sanity and at least one major power block of the world. Speaking of major power blocks of the world, there could be a seismic shift going on. Things could be heading west in the USA with Mayor Mamdani in New York. Who knows what's going to happen? Texas has been the epicenter of new exchange activity in the USA during the course of the last 12 months. And of course, where has the real excitement lain? The opening of a huge office by NASDAQ in downtown Dallas, and also the creation of NYSE Texas. This was probably one of the most epic examples of brilliant management in the exchange business you can imagine. No sooner had the Texas Stock Exchange raised $180 million, now I think somewhere over $250 million has been raised, than New York Stock Exchange struck back, removed NYSE Texas's, added NYSE Texas to the roster of exchanges in the world and removed the Texas Stock Exchange's very raison d'etre, I fear. This was an epic move altogether. The country club duopoly fought back, they've moved west, and it's a huge warning call for the tri-state area and particularly the city of New York City. If they want to mess about, then the future of our stock exchanges in the United States of America could well be far, far from the madding crowd of Wall Street and on, as they now call it, Y'all Street. It's tough to know where to start when we look at the year in the consolidated tape world. All those comrades bemoaning the passing of the Soviet Politburo continue to pin their hopes that the US SIP committees will eventually spawn a new era of full-blown communism. They could chalk off 2025 as another good year in the USA. For those who associate markets with concepts like improvement, coherence, or even progress, it was at best disappointing, and presumably one could describe it as committee work as usual. Exchange Invest, you can find that at exchangeinvest.com. Head over and subscribe. Pixelated a SIPs, a guide for the perplexed. That was as the SIP committee had its first round of votes for stasis. So we're far from unanimity in the 24-hour trading debate, even as the rest of the world moves ahead, even as DTCC, yes, DTCC is going to be ready for extra trading hours up to 24 hours a day for US stock by Q2 of 2026. And remarkably, the progress in consolidated tapes came from Europe, the relative financial backwater, the place where the Brussels blob is managing to destroy the economy day by day. Nonetheless, despite those assiduous efforts on the part of the Brussels blob to ensure ongoing economic stasis, there was truly tangible progress towards consolidated tapes, which might, no snickering at the back please, become the envy of the world, albeit on the niche level of volume, which is now EU markets versus that big kahuna across the Atlantic, which is the US market, 70% of global GDP, even after the dollar had not the best of years. Meanwhile, the parish is to be applauded, more or less. It had a remarkable year for uptime. Well done to major vendors such as NASDAQ, Connemara, EP3, Sonara, et al., who saw 100% uptime. However, we were frustrated by two major outages outside of affliction suffered by the class underperformers, ASX and LSCG. But then again, they're sort of priced in to be incompetent nowadays, I fear. Anyway, in what might be a fitting testament to the old world giving way to the new, the biggest tech outages of the year were suffered by Bloomberg and CME. So, ladies and gentlemen, here we are at our annual review show. Once again, we're going to pick out the highlights of what people have been saying, our guests on IPO-VID during the course of this year. They're going to be discussing their thoughts on where the capital market revolution goes next, because we're always looking to the future at Exchange Invest, exchangeinvest.com being the Bourse Business Water Cooler, the exchange of information. And here we are, 26 years on from the Capital Market Revolution's original publication. Let's start with one of our earlier guests in the year, Joe Cecala, founder and CEO of Dream Exchange. He was a founder of Archipelago, had considerable experience in electronic upstart markets. What did he have to say as he came along, bouncing with optimism at the start of the year? That was our 7th of January, first show of the year, discussing the Main Street Growth Act to bring SME exchanges to the world and what he had to say about capital market revolution, its future. Let's hear from Joe.
I think we are the center mass of the target of where this revolution is occurring. What we're doing is absolutely the future of capital markets. There isn't much more to be done in financial technology. The exciting revolution, and when we say revolution, change, doesn't have to be with guns and knives. It's a change. And I think the revolution has the momentum, and obviously a piece of legislation has both political parties agreeing that the future of capital markets is in the average retail investor who now can invest with an app on their phone. That's already there. But the menu, the choices, the democratization of the ability to go and make an investment. That's our future. The imagination is the place where money goes to be born, because the most imaginative things often and almost always become worth more money. If you've got a better idea, a better mousetrap, a better solution, that's the future. And it's kind of actually been the past, but the future is restoring it to a more democratized, more free market system that allows for increased participation from the companies and the retail investing market. There's a whole, I hope I live long enough to see how big the venture marketplace in the United States can become.
A super optimistic Joe Cecala there, looking towards the venture market and the possibilities to come with that. Imagination is the place where money goes to be born. What a fabulous statement, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, not such a great year for the Dream Exchange overall. They ended the year with a series of exposés via the Wall Street Journal, suggesting links to various parties that hadn't been disclosed. And unfortunately, as we record this show just before Christmas, currently their application for an exchange license has been rejected. It will be interesting to see what happens next year, and hopefully we can manage to find the wondrous energy that Joe Cecala projected, certainly helping push the venture market forward in the USA in the near future. Our second guest this year was Sally Bridgeland, an actuary with extensive executive, advisory and non-executive experience across pensions and investment. She's a non-executive director at Impacts Invest Asset Management Group, which is PLC. She's been on the board since 2015, and she was in fact chair from 2024. Sally was awarded the non-executive director of the year in the FTSE EM category at the 2023 NED Awards in London. Talking about neurodiversity and finance, what a fabulous topic that was in show number 166 on the 14th of January. Let's hear from Sally.
It goes broader and longer term. It thinks about things it didn't think about before. It cares about things that it didn't care about before. And in doing that is trying to create a world that pensioners will want to retire into. It was funny you saying, we're taking long. We're not retiring when we thought we were going to. I reached the tender age of 60 a couple of months ago, and I didn't think I would be going this long, and I didn't think I'd be enjoying it as much as I am. Thinking about that combination of finance, politics and purpose, and how you actually mix those things up together and actually come out with longer term financial markets that actually create a different kind of impact. That's where I hope things will go, and I'm an optimist. My blood group is B positive, and that's the way I am.
Be positive blood group, and that's the way I am. We've all got to be optimistic, ladies and gentlemen, no matter what 2025 threw at us. Sally Bridgeland was a wonderful guest on this show, and it was a joy to enjoy her many insights on January the 14th. Moving to our third guest of the year, Alan Dickinson, one of the legendary live floor local traders. He joined the Royal Exchange floor on day one in 1982, having previously worked on the London Stock Exchange since 1972 and at the Coffee, Sugar and Cocoa Exchange since 1974. Subsequently, Alan went on to run Tower Trading in London and most recently has become chairman of Trader Lab, a no-code, low-code platform simplifying data analysis for traders. Discussing what else? A life story with two Fs, of course. Let's hear from Alan.
The way the markets have to go, especially in the UK and some of the European countries, there's a complete lack of education on the financial markets themselves. And I really do believe the exchanges should be badgering the governments and they should be getting financial learning as part of the curriculum of every school, starting from a very young age. So people understand, because more and more people can't afford their pensions, the governments can't afford to be paying people. They need to have some sort of education from a very young age for saving funds and the magic of compounding and saving from a very young age, very small amounts that can make such a huge difference later on in life. I think the exchanges need to help get that education system out there. It's not really capital market revolution, but it's something that, looking at my grandkids, how are they going to have, apart from inheriting money, how are they going to have the chance to build up reasonable pots to see themselves in later life? The Americans are so far ahead of us in that. Everyone you speak to talks about their 401k. We just don't have that in England or Europe, and I think it's hugely important, and the exchanges should do their part to encourage it.
And there you are, ladies and gentlemen, in, I do believe, the 50th anniversary of the 401k, indeed hitting the American marketplace, something which has fundamentally revolutionized savings and investment for millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans. That's what we need in the UK and Europe, and indeed we need a great deal more financial education. Right on the button there, a man who himself has had an incredible period of time to not merely compound his investments, but compound his investment understanding. It was a joy to chat to Alan Dickinson during the course of this year. Now, one of the things we do at Exchange Invest, ladies and gentlemen, apart from exchangeinvest.com, the Bourse Business newsletter, the exchange of information, which I'd very much like you to subscribe to if you're not doing so already, because it pays for these live streams, amongst other things. And also, let's face it, will make you uniquely informed when you come to the water cooler in order to discuss what's happening in the world's market infrastructure with our unparalleled track record of understanding what's going on in those markets over the course of 13 years of publication, going into our 14th in 2027. But also we produce a great deal of short videos. And for today's show, I've got three fabulous highlights. Let's talk about something that everybody talks about naturally over the dinner table: Tolstoy and tariffs.
Meanwhile, in Big World, we all know that the Trumpy one is reshaping the world taxation order. What does that essentially mean? Well, now we've got two very, very disparate groups of people in the world, and it can be surmised by none other than Tolstoy's great novel, Anna Karenina. In that, he famously said, all happy families are alike. All unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And it's the same with tariffs as Trump picks off what is the problem with the overall tariff conundrum, whether it's transshipment, whether it's some sort of production issue, whether it's voluminous red tape where the European Union protects us through stupid 13 million pages of rules in order to effectively kill commerce. So remember, ladies and gentlemen, Anna Karenina syndrome, that's the situation with tariffs. All free traders are similarly happy, and all those subject to tariff regimes are unhappy in their own way. For more in Big World, like or follow.
And ladies and gentlemen, how can we summarize this? Well, we should have free trade in kittens, ladies and gentlemen, something that would keep everybody much happier the world over. Thank you very much to my co-star of this particular show. We may have more appearing as the show goes on, and ultimately, yes, indeed. Tariffs today are like Tolstoy's unhappy families, each a mess in its own unique way. Free trade, that's the rare happy ending. Now, on to our fourth guest of this year. We had the joy of chatting to my dear friend, Susan Gidel, leading financial astrologer, specializing in financial markets with several decades of frontline commodity futures market experience. Returning to IPO for a third time, Susan was discussing her 2025 outlook. Let's hear from Susan.
I was concerned about the continued existence of financial markets. But I have to say, I looked at the chart that I use for the New York Stock Exchange, and I see nothing that is debilitating, frightening, worrisome. So I think the capital markets will survive.
And here we are, ladies and gentlemen, towards the end of the year. The capital markets have not merely survived, they have thrived. And it was a joy to have Susan on with her fabulous inputs. She produces one of the most engaging newsletters around, ladies and gentlemen, talking all about financial astrology. Always worth listening to and always worth reading her missives. Another person who's permanently worth listening to, who also hails from the great city of Chicago, the original state that really championed the modern day futures market, Ira Harris, with over 47 years of experience in all areas of commodity trading, broad expertise in cash currency markets. Ira is an active macro global trend trader, a regular guest analyst on currency and global interest rate markets on CNBC, Bloomberg, and indeed, it has to be said, IPO-VID. We talked to Ira in February. We were discussing the topic of investing in Trump world as the president was inaugurated for a second time. Let's hear from Ira.
Well, I look to Europe because I want to see what they do with the capital markets union. I think we'll see, outside of what happens in Europe, and I think that's very important, I think we'll see central bank digital coin. I do, because they want to get to electronic money. But in order to have electronic money, you have to have some underlying asset. And that's why those stable coins, to me, are so fascinating. Now, what will be the underlying asset? I think that the academic world has pushed for electronic money because they realized during COVID, when they went to nominal negative rate, that they know this, that if the economy were to slow down, and this is what every central banker and every academic economist, they want to control the business cycle. In fact, they want to eradicate the business cycle so that you don't have those ups and downs where you get layoffs and unemployment. And how would you do it? They learned with the nominal negative yields that if you take money negative or low enough, their hope is always that people will spend it. And that way you'll smooth out the downturns. When the ECB did that, they're salivating, can we go to negative 5%, which is basically that Patrick puts his money in the bank and he has to pay the bank 5% for the right to hold his money, right? Well, you're not going to do that. That's a fool's game. And if you can buy gold, but if you really go into a deflation, gold I always thought would be good in a deflation because the way central banks will react to it. But these negative yields, nominal negative yields, are really going to be fascinating, and I think drive the stable coin more than anything, especially if they're backed by a combination of various precious metals or underlying commodities. I think this is the big discussion to come.
Asset-backed stablecoins, something that seemed to be, they're a hot topic at the moment. The trouble is just what is the quality of the assets that are backing most of these stablecoins? How stable are they? And does anybody remember Herstatt risk? A mere, 51 years on from the collapse of that amazing German banking institution. Ira Harris on the spot, as always, some fabulous remarks there. Very, very interesting also to hear him talking about looking towards Europe for the Capital Markets Union. What a tragedy we end the year with the European Union espousing a monobourse, ESMA taking central control of all exchanges, and indeed a tragic word salad coming from Brussels just in the course of the last weeks of this year, which suggests that they have indeed learned nothing and will learn nothing about financial markets for the foreseeable future. Truly a tragic predicament, and one which I'm sure disappoints Ira just as much as it disappoints a European like me. Kathleen Tyson has long made her home in Europe, in the United Kingdom. She led the operational design for CLS Bank, taking the foreign exchange market from $940 billion a day to more than $14 trillion. Now, there's serious money for you in daily settlements. She supported the modernization of central banks to fully digital real-time operations and much else besides in a truly glittering campaign career. And with Kathleen Tyson, she was talking about her incredible book, Multi-Currency Mercantilism. Let's hear from her.
Wealth and markets are moving east. The London Bullion Market Exchange is owned by Hong Kong exchanges, and it has 3 vaults, JP Morgan, HSBC, and ICBC. Market pricing power is increasingly Asian, so that Shanghai Gold Exchange is now doing much higher volumes, much higher business. Moscow Gold Exchange is also doing business. Dubai Gold Exchange doing a lot of business, as you said. You can argue about which bit of Russia is Asian, mostly Asian. They're roughly speaking an Asian mass, a Eurasian mass, and they are taking that pricing power home, and they are taking the wealth home. The old model used to be you make money and then you invest it into the US, either into treasuries or into the stock market. Increasingly, they're keeping the money home and they're investing it home.
The world is moving east, ladies and gentlemen. A very, very exciting message, one which we have heard from many pundits over time, but it was all the more intriguing to have Kathleen Tyson offer it to us with a very, very deep dive in what was going on in what she believes is going to be a multi-currency world. And check out her book, Multi-Currency Mercantilism, an absolutely gripping read. Someone else who is a prolific author, a great thinker once again, and truly one of the leading economists of our time, Sir Paul Collier. Preeminent as a global development economist, he's Professor of Economics and Public Policy at the Blavatnik School of Government, Oxford University. He delivered to us a fascinating discussion as we roamed around the world looking for development optimism, where there needs to be more action in all forms of economic environment. Left Behind, one of his great books, and The Future of Capitalism, delivered to us another epic IPO-VID. Let's hear from Sir Paul.
There'll be many extensions of ChatGPT. They'll be so competitive that they'll be cheap. So I rather think the money won't be in spotting the next super IT thing. It'll be somewhat more traditional places that find this use of knowledge super powerful, and they are more traditional economy, which gets a huge boost from all this cheap use of knowledge, which is effectively what AI is. It's much better use of our brain power. Our brain power can concentrate on the bits that we don't understand, that you need human judgment for, and the bog standard stuff can be done by AI. So that's an exciting future.
What can I say except, hey, ChatGPT, how do you feel about doing the bog standard stuff for the rest of eternity? Seems like the only question we can ask there. On point, as always, a magnificent insight from Sir Paul Collier, someone who has truly become one of the great grandfathers of the development economics business the world over. Over at the bottom of the stock exchange tree, Max Cunningham joined us during the course of, well, actually our April 1st show, IPO-VID 173. The topic was advancing NSX Australia. This discussion took place, incidentally, before the Canadian Securities Exchange launched their successful takeover bid for NSX, which threatens to deliver an incredible upheaval to the Australian market landscape. And therefore, it was a joy to chat to the former ASX listings boss, Max Cunningham, who was heading the National Stock Exchange of Australia and is still heading it as it looks towards its new Canadian-Australian partnership. Let's hear from Max Cunningham.
I've talked extensively about this in the local media, and I think it's hard to ignore, and that is private capital. This is a multi-decade structural shift that is occurring in all markets, and you ignore it at your peril. We can't just say we want more companies to list and say, oh, it will happen. We need to look at why they're not listing, and some will stay private, and if they can particularly meet their funding opportunities privately, which a lot of them are doing because of the success of private equity and venture capital, then they will do so. And you talked about family companies and family money as well, and that transfer of wealth. But that doesn't mean there's a group of private companies that previously would have sought to go public. And so how do we work with them to access forms of public capital? Now, that might be periodic trading, that might be periodic reporting, that might be wholesale investor only. A lot of these are ideas that we've got that we're bubbling away on and working with partners on, and I've explored in different capacities in the past. So we may or may not jump into that space, but every stock exchange and every corporate regulator in the world is thinking about this, and those that aren't are asleep at the wheel and deserve to have their franchises chipped away at.
Every stock exchange and corporate regulator in the world is thinking about private capital and the many ways that they can manage to get that more into the public markets. And of course, that was a speech that took place, 8 months before the epic remarks of Chairman Paul Atkins of the SEC when he was speaking at the New York Stock Exchange later in the year, where he's working really assiduously to open the public markets to make the sluice gates easier to access for every private company to have some element of public transaction. And what could be better, ladies and gentlemen, the ability, the liquidity, the accessibility, the transparency, to use a capital market revolution phrase, of the public capital markets being open to deliver a level playing field for all. In our short video series this year, one of the things we have a lot of joy about is including not just discussions about exchanges that you can get at exchangeinvest.com, but also some things about the bigger, wider world of business and the sort of messages that they tell us. In this case, on October the 9th, we published a fabulous video for a suitable anniversary. It was one where there'd just been an epic sale of a handbag, no less, because private jets miss the point, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why we bring you our second key short video of the year.
In big world, I've always thought a great argument against private jets was the Birkin bag. Not that I'm averse to private jet rides being offered, but sometimes it can really make sense commercially to get out there and meet the people, as it were. This was the gestation of the Birkin bag, now a source of vast cash revenues, perhaps $150 million per annum, and they restrict sales to Hermes. In 1984, on a flight from London to Paris, the Hermes CEO, Jean-Louis Dumas, was seated next to a basket carrying Jane Birkin, the famous model, chanteuse, actress, etc. He bemoaned the lack of a suitable handbag for dynamic fashionistas like her. As the story goes, Dumas got to work sketching on napkins in flight. The original Birkin was given to arguably Britain's most famous export to Paris, and Le Birkin sold hers a decade later at Nade's benefit. The handbag sold again in 2000 AD for an undisclosed price before making a fairly staggering $10 million, including fees at Sotheby's in Paris earlier this year, to a Japanese bidder. And in case you haven't gathered, that was the highest price ever paid for any handbag at auction. For more in Big World, like or follow.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I think one of the most incredible things was also that this man who ran Hermes managed to have Jane Birkin sit beside him in an airplane flight, and he could manage a conversation. I think a lot of us chaps would have probably struggled to manage to make coherent conversation with the iconically beautiful Miss Birkin in her prime. Thus, ladies and gentlemen, from that short video and the wondrous news about Birkin handbags, we'll be back with more luxury insights in our short videos during the course of 2026. Let's go towards some of our key books of the year. We're going to have another selection. Actually, we've got 6 or 7 books coming in this second episode of this series, because this is part 1 of 2025 in review that you're watching, recorded just before it went live in LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube this year. Let's start with a book with, frankly, the OG of not just carbon markets, but essentially financial futures markets, a man whose developmental footprint has been across every single market on earth in some way, shape, or form. Carbon Hunters is a discussion reflecting on the growth and the birth of the carbon markets. And who better to write it than Paula DePerna, who was fundamentally involved as the COO of the Chicago Climate Exchange, and the OG himself, Richard Sander, Professor Dr. Richard Sander, and also, by the way, an incredible guest on 2 IPO-VIDs. If you're looking for something to do over the Christmas holiday period, watch 123 IPO-VID, the father of financial futures with Richard Sander, and also watch IPO-VID 192, devoted to this book, amongst other topics, Confessions of a Carbon Hunter. That was a show that we recorded live in front of the audience of the Association of Futures Markets Tech Day in association with Connemara EP3 in Chicago at the Union League Club just last month in November. Carbon Hunters, hugely recommended as a fabulous book for one and all. And that brings us neatly to talking about things that investors can often miss. And our second book by Jose Mayora, Wall Street's Blind Spots. That's an absolutely super read, ladies and gentlemen, worth it, whether you're an institutional investor or a retail investor. Understand the things that the financial professionals don't necessarily see upfront and so clearly. Jose Mayora was also our guest on IPO-VID number 189 on 21st of October this year, and a great show. I recommend that to you as well if you're bored over Christmas. A third sensational guest we had this year was Paul Podolsky. He discussed his book, The Uncomfortable Truth About Money. This is a fantastic read once again, ladies and gentlemen. Really worth thinking about. Somebody who started his life not in financial markets as a journalist, trained himself and ended up being a leading hedge fund manager and investor for this. The Uncomfortable Truth About Money, Wall Street's Blind Spots, and Carbon Hunters by the OG of financial futures, Dr. Richard Sander. All brilliant books. And if you want to buy copies, you can even drop by exchangeinvest.com and we'll give you a link to go straight to purchasing those. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to our second fabulous economist of the year who was on the show. We had three: Sir Paul Collier, Sir John Kay, and of course, as I was just mentioning him, Richard Sander, not knighted by the King or the Queen, but nonetheless a Chevalier de la Légion d'Honneur. Sir John Kay is one of Britain's leading economists with wide practical experience in business and finance. He's a fellow of the British Academy and Royal Society of Edinburgh. He was the founding dean of Oxford University's Side Business School, and he held a chair at London Business School to boot. He's a winner of the Senior Wincott Award for Financial Journalism for his Financial Times columns, and richly deserved it is too. We took a step back from pure financial markets for this one. When he joined us for IPO-VID 174 on the 8th of April, we were talking beyond 21st century corporations, the topic of his latest book. Let's hear from the fabulous Sir John Kay.
I hope that the capital market revolution will make capital less important to business than it has been. What we've talked about at some length has been the ways in which capital has disappeared as the defining feature of a business. That's very obvious if you look at Roesch and compare it with Cupertino. The paradox which has occurred as that has occurred, and the capital market has expanded greatly in both scale and remuneration. And most of that, in my view, consists of people changing rather pointlessly existing assets with each other. And it's meant the great manager has been the person who has been portfolios of businesses, buying and selling businesses as if he were a fund manager. That's not what business will be like in future. I think the key story will be that of developing collective knowledge and collective capabilities.
The ding of a light bulb moment, ladies and gentlemen, as Sir John Kay was sharing his wisdom with us, looking towards 20th century and 21st century corporations and beyond. Wonderful to have such a great economic thinker give his wisdom to the show. Another academic who was delivering sensational academic wisdom to IPO-VID during the course of this year was none other than Dominik Roesch. Dominik is an associate professor in finance at the University of Buffalo. His research focuses on market quality, in particular investigating the joint dynamics of arbitrage, liquidity, and efficiency. He has been part of an NSF infrastructure grant, which allowed him to build up a framework based on one-take data to efficiently analyze financial data sets as a whole. His topic on the 15th of April this year on IPO-VID number 175 was a rather controversial one: how floors help markets. Let's hear from Dominik.
I think it's always important to realize that a lot of the future will also be similar to the past. So every time there's a new technology, everybody thinks everything will be completely different. So this time is different. Most of the time, in a big sense, it's very similar. So firms will still raise capital using equity, using debt. This equity will trade one way or another. These are the big things that are just similar. On the other side, I think this idea of AI, this idea of machine learning, I think it might make market actually less efficient over the next years. Partly because these algorithms, these machine learning techniques, they are based on picking up correlations that existed in the past and therefore extrapolate this idea to the future. If traders now believe their ChatGPT suggestions, it will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Markets will do indeed exactly what they did in the past. Markets will get less efficient because they don't incorporate the latest information anymore. Trading against it is extremely risky because it's very difficult to trade against overpriced securities. Still, well, I guess at some point, market will be so far away from the fundamentals that people will realize, and then it will crash. So I think overall, these new technologies need to be used carefully, and they don't replace the idea of like traders that actually analyze the fundamentals of companies.
fascinating concept that AI and machine learning might actually make things slightly less efficient in the near term. That's a very, very interesting pointer that we heard uniquely from Dominik Roesch during the course of this year on IPO-VID. And again, a good example of why we're always looking for alternative thinkers to join this show. Speaking of alternative thinkers, our guest, Matthew Ringgenberg, a professor of finance at the University of Utah, his research focuses on the role of institutional investors in financial markets. And that's why we had this great topic, IPO-VID number 176, at the end of April this year, discussing the future of research. Let's hear from Matthew.
In the short term, I think it's clear that globalization is backsliding. I mean, markets are becoming less integrated, capital barriers are being erected, and even before the recent round of tariffs, I think if you really look at the data, global trade has been dropping and markets have been becoming less connected. So I think that's the short term. In the long term, I really hope that just the long-term trend from the last 2 centuries continues. We've seen an expansion of markets, we've seen an expansion of trade, and it's corresponded to the largest increase in living standards that humans have ever experienced. We talked about Matt Ridley's book, The Rational Optimist. I'm going to take the optimistic view. I think in the short term, globalization might backslide, but in the long term, the trend will continue. We'll see more prosperity, more progress. Markets will continue to expand.
Ladies and gentlemen, music to our ears. Love to Matthew Ringgenberg for this fabulous show that we enjoyed earlier this year. We've seen an expansion of markets. We've seen an expansion of trade, and it's corresponded to the largest increase in living standards that humans have ever experienced. Bravo, free markets, ladies and gentlemen. Of course, we need to have some safety barriers. Of course, we need to have some regulation. But in truth, the markets deliver. And that's why this, as I will never tire of saying, is the golden ages of exchanges. And that's why in this, the golden age of exchanges, we at Exchange Invest and my broader business are dedicated to building the markets of the future in all their many progressive shapes. Of course, one of the things that we need to have in order to make markets work is all human life to be represented. And that's one of my favorite quotations, of course, from Paul Gallico, the New Yorker who, when he was a famous novelist, still tended to cover New York ball games on a Saturday evening. People couldn't understand why he was sitting in the bleachers getting tomato ketchup squeezed all over him, children jumping up and down while he was trying to scribble notes about who was doing what at the bottom of the third or the top of the fourth innings, etc. But as he said at the time, Paul Gallico, when someone asked him, why do you still cover the ball games when you're a successful novelist? He said, because all human life is there. And frankly, ladies and gentlemen, markets work when all human life is there. And that's why it was a joy to have Meaghan Johnson join our show this year, because she's the co-author of a fabulous book, Inclusive Finance. She's a seasoned fintech researcher and consultant, passionate about using emerging technologies and business models to increase financial inclusion, improve banking, and create the best possible customer experiences. A senior lecturer at CFTC, she leads a digital finance online course at Manchester Business School. She was our guest on the 6th of May this year for IPO-VID number 177, discussing what we all need to ensure that all human life is there in markets, the benefits of financial inclusion. Let's hear from Meaghan.
I think you have to look at AI to get that answer. I mean, I think AI is just really changing every single facet of every sector, every way in which we live our day-to-day life. So I think, while I can't give a descriptive answer, I would say my answer is to start by looking at what's happening with AI.
Once again, the opportunity therein with what's happening with AI, providing all manners of interesting possibilities for the whole outlook for financial markets and financial inclusion. We're going to hear from Alessandro Hatami, the co-author to Meaghan Johnson, in just a moment. But first of all, let's play our third reel of the day. Once again, here we melanged between not quite the world of handbags, but nonetheless a significant luxury product, as well as one which has an industrial side. And of course, a very, very fundamental and pulsating market around the world, albeit one that's very difficult to commoditize in futures terms because the carats are not all the same in every position. But nonetheless, let me start that again. Lab growing is the new forever.
Meanwhile, in Big World, Ian Fleming popularized the phrase diamonds are forever, with 007 also appearing in a fabulous film as well as a novel of the same name. However, here's the rub. Lab-grown diamonds are now forever, at least in the marriage game. Having been barely single digits of the marriage business, now we're finding engagement rings in 2024. 52% of American couples purchased lab-grown diamonds. Why that trend has suddenly exploded? Why is such a trend taking place? Well, it could be down to cost. $845 for the artificial versus the better part of $4,000 for the naturally mined diamond. For more in Big World, like or follow.
There you go. In 2024, 52% of couples were choosing lab-grown sparkles. Stunning, sustainable, and smart. And also probably a bit of a blow to all those people who are mining the old rough-cut stuff out of the rock in Africa and elsewhere. Revolutionary, fascinating, ahead of the curve, always. That's the Exchange Invest advantage, ladies and gentlemen, not just in the exchange of information, but across all manner of other stories we bring to you in Big World and our Big World videos. Moving back to financial inclusion, it was a joy to welcome back our old friend Alessandro Hatami, who had been on this show previously when he was discussing Reinventing Banking and Finance, the best banking book of 2021, voted by Investopedia. Alessandro is a financial transformation strategist, author, and a leading voice in the digital transformation of banking, payments, and finance. He joined us alongside his co-author, Meaghan Johnson, to discuss on the 6th of May 2025 at IPO-VID number 177, the benefits of financial inclusion.
Well, obviously, AI is a clear winner. And what's going to happen is we will see an increased importance given to cryptocurrencies, but not the cryptos of a CBD of the stable coins and the speculative ones, but actually governments stepping in into using the idea of a crypto guaranteed currency, so a CBDC, replacing their digital currencies. What this will do, it will change the ecosystem of how payments are generated. It will make everything more efficient, but at the same time, it will change the way the financial providers are structured. So in my view, China is already well on its way in developing the EU1. The European Union is looking at it. A lot of countries around the globe are doing so. The one that is staying behind is the United States, also because regulatory-wise, they are not as supportive of creating a national fiat currency driven crypto fiat currency, which would replace or disadvantage a lot of the organizations that lobby the government for regulation. Let's put it that way, to be subtle. We will see a normalization, I think, of digital payments of cryptocurrency, and maybe initially in parallel between the traditional fiat, but eventually it is clear and obvious that the future is a form of distributed ledger technology for payments.
How fascinating and increased importance given to cryptocurrency, which is fascinating given the fact that as I record this, cryptocurrencies seem to be in a bit of a slump after Bitcoin has really not had that great of a year in terms of price advancement, despite the fact that every single news story seems to have been in Bitcoin's favor. There's something in there, ladies and gentlemen. We'll doubtless be unpacking that further during the course of 2026. And if you're already a reader of BitCarnage, our subsidiary newsletter on the world of crypto and digital assets, or indeed Exchange Invest itself, you'll know exactly what we've been thinking over the course of the last year. And, well, I would like to say modesty forbids me, but it doesn't. We got it absolutely spot on right, where everybody else lost their heads and thought we were going to see Bitcoin at $1 million by this point in the year. Those are the reasons why you've got the Exchange Invest and indeed also BitCarnage Advantage if you care to subscribe. Moving on in our guest list, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Beddis began in technology in Hong Kong and evolved to key roles shaping the future of markets, including developing the Hong Kong stock options market, which was the first in the Southeast Asian region, and then honing the business of block trading with the BIDS platform, which he co-founded. Mark's achievements are many in between, and he brings a fascinating perspective to markets from his 4 decades of frontline experience around the world, which is why not only was he our guest on IPO-VID 178, The Evolution of Trading, but also Mark nowadays forms a cornerstone of our panel sessions, which we introduced during the course of last year, which provide a fascinating opportunity for broader discourse amongst various participants in the world of finance and markets. Let's hear from Mark.
Everything that we've been discussing here points to technology reaching out further and further into the community, if you like, into society. The retail investor will at some point want to start asking the exchanges and the brokers to continue to cater even more to what they want. I'll just give you one simple example. To my mind, it's kind of odd that an options contract is for 100 shares. Right. And whatever the share is 100 shares. And there's a lot of people who would like to trade an option on 5 shares of Amazon or Tesla. And you can't really do that today. But why can't you do it? I can't think of a real solid reason why that can't be done with today. I mean, you've got to check, a lot of laws and regulations would have to change. That kind of thing is doable. So I think technology will be an enabler of that kind of micro change to especially benefit the retail investor. That's one thing I would look out for.
Technology is scaling out further and further into communities and society, and Mark Beddis with a laser-focused eye on how it can impact futures, options, and indeed delivering greater and incredible product in the era of super liquidity. It was a joy to speak to Mark on various of our panel sessions this year. He'll be back during the course of 2026 when we have another series of roundtable discussions. Meanwhile, it was a joy to go straight to the heart of Africa, indeed a continent where I had the joy of visiting during February this year when we went to Nairobi for an excellent AFM conference hosted by the Nairobi Securities Exchange. In this case, we were introducing the Ethiopian Securities Exchange in IPO-VID number 179. We invited the COO, Michael Habte, to come along. He has experience having worked with top-tier global financial firms, including Citigroup, Bloomberg, BBVA, Moody's, and Wood Mackenzie. He co-led the ASX Project Office, which led to his becoming COO of the Ethiopian Securities Exchange, where he was overseeing all aspects of the exchange's operations, including trading, clearing, settlement, and regulatory compliance. Let's hear from Michael.
Almost everything is becoming data-driven. Trading is becoming very algorithmic. It's very hard to get edge, as they use the term, or generate excess returns that the market is not generating. So I think the revolution will go quantitative-driven. Already it has been, but I think even more, even with decision-making for people to make investments, etc. The revolution, I think, in my view, the rest of the world, the West has been leading, obviously, in the financial sector for a long time, but I think the rest of the world is catching up and can even leapfrog in certain respects. But really, if I just put it succinctly, I think the revolution is going in the fact that it's truly being democratized now. When I started in school 20 years ago, I had to call a broker. I had to pay a fee just to trade. Now AI can basically build me a program to connect to a broker, set up an account and trade with very little input from anybody else, sitting anywhere in the world. So it's really leaps and bounds. The sector is changing, but I would say it's really becoming more data-driven. All these processes we're talking about, brokers, exchanges, etc., will transform, I think, over time. Blockchain can make major changes down the road, especially in terms of settlement and how quick trades can be settled, etc. You don't need to wait 2-3 days to get your money. So a lot of that will change, in my view.
There we have it. The revolution will go even more quantitatively driven. Liquidity, accessibility, transparency, as the book Capital Market Revolution itself espoused when it was first published on July the 1st, 1999. And of course, 99.8% of all people in financial markets thought it was delulu. But actually, it seems to be rather mainstream now, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Well, those are the sorts of insights that we follow up with on Exchange Invest. Via exchangeinvest.com, Monday through Friday, you can subscribe and be ultimately the smartest person at the Bourse Business water cooler. And also on a Saturday, there's the free macro edition where you can manage to learn more about interesting trends in everything from fashion to finance to business across the world. Michael Habte there, he subsequently departed the Ethiopian Securities Exchange towards the end of this year. We wish you all the very, very best, Michael. I've no doubt that in what is now a growing and thriving Ethiopian Securities Exchange landscape, that you are going to find yourself some fabulous new employment in the near future, and you're going to be bouncing back into the parish. Somebody who bounced back into the parish from the London Stock Exchange, where he was the head of turquoise and much else besides, rather a living legend of what went on in the overall world of financial markets, was Robert Barnes. He was on us on one of our panel sessions during the course of July, and it was a joy to chat to him. But I'm getting ahead of the narrative, ladies and gentlemen, because first I want to go to another living legend of the market structure industry, Peter Randall. He was the guest on panel number 180 when we introduced the IPO-VID panel in June, 24th of June, no less. He's a former Chi-X co-founder and CEO. And let's hear from the legendary Peter Randall.
Difference and change is certainly coming down the pike. But there's one really important thing, which is that the nature of the market has dramatically changed. In Australia, there's a lot more retail investment. In fact, I would argue the largest part of retail investment is actually it takes place these days between online brokers who've actually got cash or stock on the books, in the records, available for delivery almost immediately. So you can then begin to sort of ask the question, to what extent are all these constructs of clearing, where a house becomes a buyer to every seller and a seller to every buyer, if those assets are already effectively held in trusted financial institution like a bank, then why are we even paying for this service? There are a lot of questions here.
The nature of the market has dramatically changed, as always. A fabulous seer of what goes on in the capital market structure. Peter Randall, very much a revolutionary of the first class, giving us some fascinating upside and insights once again. And that leads us, ladies and gentlemen, to our final guest of this part one of 2025, the year in review, with Dr. Robert Barnes, a man who probably needs no introduction. On top of a wealthy career at UBS, he went on to work for the LSE, running Turquoise, their most dynamic market, for many years, and now is co-CEO of BPX Digital Securities Exchange. Let's hear from Robert.
One of the reasons why Amazon and Apple grew so large is their business models have been all about digitalization, right? Optimizing the workflow. So if we come to tokenization, what are we actually talking about? Tokenization is nothing more than, in my humble opinion, securitization with benefits. So if someone's got some money, some cash, which is central bank money, you got a £10 note that's from the Bank of England. But as soon as you put it into a commercial bank, it's no longer your money. You now have a credit relationship, an IOU with the bank. Now, if the bank's got 100 and they keep 10 of capital, they can lend out that 90. But if they want to do any more, they have to basically package the 90 and sell it. That's securitization, we know. What you can do is, tokenization is securitization with benefits. So when you sell your asset, you get the money same day. You increase the velocity of money, right? You have the benefit of traceability.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the key concepts that we're going to be taking forward in Exchange Invest. Forget a billion blockchains blooming, ladies and gentlemen. What we are going to see in the future is actually a greater market in securitization. And for many, many reasons, that may not actually be DLT-centric at all. That's the thing that people, I believe, are getting wrong about the entire market at the moment in terms of their excitement. The truth is, however, securitization with benefits, the art of tokenizing, fundamentally restructures our markets. And that was a core concept of capital market revolution going back all the way to 1999, 1998, when it was originally written. And that's why this is such a beautifully fitting note to end on, where we've had the opportunity to talking to an incredible array of financial geniuses during the course of this discussion. And it therefore serves only to say a thank you to all of our guests during the course of today. Joe Cecala, Sally Bridgeland, Alan Dickinson, Susan Gidel, Ira Harris, Kathleen Tyson, Sir Paul Collier, Max Cunningham, Sir John Kay, Dominik Roesch, Matthew Ringgenberg, Meaghan Johnson, Alessandro, Hatami, Mark Beddis, Michael Habte, Peter Randall, and last but by no means least, Dr. Robert Barnes. We're going to be back next week, ladies and gentlemen, with the second part of this review series on December the 16th, with a year-end review and some additional commentary from me in between the great insights of our fantastic guests from the second half of 2025. It only remains for me to say a huge word of thanks to our production team today. Thank you to Janella, to Natalie and to Racy for delivering such a smooth and fantastic show. And if you're watching this during the month of December over the Christmas period and you're thinking about a marketplace or an exchange that you would like to build, whatever that piece of market infrastructure is, ladies and gentlemen, get in touch. We'll be happy to build it for you in 2026 with a revolutionary fervor. My name is Patrick L. Young. Join me daily in exchangeinvest.com, the Bourse Business newsletter, the exchange of information. Let me say for now, I wish you all a great week in life and markets, and thank you very much for watching.